So now let's get into the key highlights for release 40. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to Steve.
Thanks, Harrison. I think this is release number 12 for me. Before I get into the first feature here, what I want to do is point out a few features in the deck. You'll be receiving a PDF of this deck, and we've made it somewhat actionable, which when I was thinking about that, I'm thinking of supplier actionable notifications for some reason. But up in the upper right-hand corner of each of the gray areas for each of the features, you'll see a little icon with an arrow. Harrison is pointing out to it. That is a link directly out to the release notes. So if you want to look, read more, do a little bit more research on a particular feature, you can click that icon. And then across the bottom, what we've done is made this really easy for you to just at a glance know whether this feature is on by default, whether there's any impact to your roles and permissions or integrations. So those are great to just kind of scan through and kind of get a feel for, what level of impact does this potentially have on you and your Coupa system. When we were getting together, the three of us, and preparing for this webinar, we found that we each had a particular, even though we had we shared some favorites, but we each had a favorite. So this happens to be my favorite feature here out of the group. And every time there's a release, I go through it an initial time and I'm like, oh, okay, it's okay. And then I go through it a little bit more deeply. I'm like, oh, that's really cool. Basically, a powerful component of approval chains is the ability to configure these conditions. And you can test on supplier and commodity and chart of account segment or even a custom field, but you only had 6 lines to configure the conditions here. And that basically this is what's determining whether the approval chain is going to be triggered or not. You now have 10 lines. So Coupa added an additional 4. So if you're ever in a position where you're just like, oh man, I just could use 1 or 2 more, you've got it. Um, there is no data in them. If there's no data in them, then what Coupa does, it collapses it, and it's only going to show you the first few, like the first 3 lines at the top of the screen. But if there's data in them, you'll see them all. You'll see there's a little blue show more link, which will display the rest of the lines. I just think this is going to be a really significant bump to add more flexibility when you're creating your approval chain conditions. The next one we have, what do you do when you want someone to be included in the approval process, but you don't want them or you don't need them to actually participate in the approval process? Well, you add them as a watcher. And you're not limited to only one. You can add multiple watchers. Well, what Coupa's done in this feature is extended that same feature out that you're already familiar with to custom object form approval chains. So that's really a nice little add-on there. So this happens to be Michael, and I'll pass it over to Michael for some commentary here. Basically, escalations can now be limited to only the next approver in the management hierarchy, regardless of their approval limit. It then goes to the next approver in the approval chain thereafter. There's this checkbox that you see that's actually, we kind of highlighted it, but it's at the bottom of the approval reminders and escalation section. And when you hover over the little information bubble, that blue bubble with the eye in it, the text reads basically, enable this option to escalate the approval to the next manager in the order set by the management hierarchy. When disabled, the approval will escalate to the manager with the sufficient approval limit, skipping all managers in between. And it says this applies to documents configured to escalate through the approver's management hierarchy or for approvers added by specific approver plus management hierarchy chains. So Michael, why don't you tell our attendees why you think why this is your favorite?
Yeah, be still my heart. This is a pain point for me going all the way back to being a Coupa admin and being a Coupa customer back in 2020 or 2021, something that we tried to solve for. Definitely understood the logic and when you were using these escalations, if it escalated past someone because they were not approving, it would move on, and the assumption was that it would move on to the next person in the management hierarchy chain. Well, what will happen is it actually will bring in the person, move them from maybe the end of the chain, the last person with management hierarchy need to satisfy whatever that total amount is on that object. So maybe it's your CFO, and instead of the CFO being the fourth or fifth approver, now because this escalated, it brings them forward and they're the second approver. And they're saying, why is this coming to me? Why did this not go through the other folks? It should be going through the whole chain before it comes to me. And it's because of that, how that escalation was built. It wants to make sure that the person with the ultimate approval authority from a financial perspective is approving this. But then it still requires those middle managers to also approve it afterwards. So this will allow you to change that so it will progress naturally. And I think the way that most customers have expected it to when turning on this feature, and won't be pulling in that highest level to be the next approver. So it won't rearrange your approval chain without asking. So I think it's a high percentage of customers who use this feature are going to appreciate the ability to choose how that works. And maybe some who quit using it or are not using it because of that now have that option so that it will escalate naturally the way that I think is most intuitive.
Excellent, thank you. And yeah, if you chose not to use it, come on back, check it out again. It may work for you now. The next one we have here, every time I see this Coupa Navi, I think of my old Garmin GPS, but that was a Nuvi anyway. This is a new generative AI solution that provides real-time support and helps you make smart decisions faster. It basically helps you navigate through the Coupa platform and helps automate and simplify various actions. I haven't had a chance to play with this yet, but I'm kind of excited to do so. You know, every time you see those two letters AI, it's just you kind of perk up, right? It's available only in English, and yeah, it's on my to-do list to check out when I get a chance. Next one there, Harrison. All right. So let's see, you know, anytime I see that blue copy icon, I think, yay, I don't have to start from scratch. I can just copy an existing record. Well, this is basically an extension of that. This feature allows you to duplicate existing contracts and make amendments from the contracts table. Basically, really saves you a lot of time and helps you be consistent with creating additional contracts rather than starting from scratch, right? The next one, improved ordering of search results, and this I had to reread this one because this is actually how it is listed in the release notes from Coupa. I would substitute ordering with sorting because you see ordering, and the first thing I think of, at least, is ordering items, right? But basically, this is kind of cool. What this is giving you, and kind of similar to what Michael and I were just talking about with the escalations, it's giving you more control over how the labels work. And normally the labels are used to add to a hosted item so that they bubble up to the top of the results list. But this way you have basically, and what you can't see behind that screenshot, for each of the four labels is a line, as you see in the bottom right-hand corner of that screenshot, and it defaults to boost if relevant. So you now have three options, a drop-down associated with each of those four labels. And the three options are boost if relevant, and that says items or web forms with the label are displayed at the top of the search results, but only if the item or the web form would have been in the top 12 results without the label, okay? That's the default selection. And then the second option is don't change sort order. So ignore the label in the searches. An item only appears in the search results if it truly is relevant to the buyer's search. The item's position in search results is the same as it would be without the label. This is recommended when you want to use the label to highlight an item just for informational purposes. And then the third option is sort to top, which is basically the old default behavior. If you want to stick with the pre-R40 behavior, items and web forms with the label are shown at the top of the results list. This is recommended to highlight company approved items and encourage users to buy them. And then tags have been enhanced a little bit. So tags are more thoroughly checked for relevance, because as far as the searching goes, when users are searching for items, basically Coupa is looking at the item name and the description, at least as far as your hosted items. And now this gives a little bit more value to the tags that you can add to those items as well. So hopefully you're familiar with Coupa Advantage, basically vetted suppliers, pre-negotiated discounts. And here's a cool thing that you may not be familiar with, but Coupa gives back a percentage of purchases to the community worldwide. So by using Coupa Advantage, not only are you saving money, but you're also basically donating to the community in one shot. So I've always thought that was really cool. So there's this new ready-made marketplace that lets you access a range of Coupa Advantage suppliers and their pre-negotiated discounts in one area. Admins that have the existing Community Advantage permission, basically that's the Advantage controller and the index permission, can enable the Coupa Advantage marketplace. And, this was kind of an interesting one because I just haven't had a whole lot of experience dealing with Amazon, even though I think many of our customers use Amazon. But this was kind of one that I went through and like, I didn't realize that this was done. But basically, open buy is another one of my favorite features where when a user searches for an item, in addition to the items being shown from your hosted catalog, items are also returned from punch-out suppliers that support the open buy. So apparently previously Amazon items were all listed separately from other suppliers at the bottom of the results list. So now the Amazon results are blended in with the rest of the supplier results. So it's making it easier to locate those items within the items and services search results. All right, we've got some usability enhancements. And so the first one, there's a new section, and basically you have to scroll down. So if you go to the inventory tab, receive subtab, and then scroll down below the table, you will see a new section called Summary of Receiving Total. And it allows you to easily view the total value of the items received and compare it in case your operations require an adjustment. I'll just give you a note because I was playing with this just the other day. There is one of the little carrots or little arrows to expand or contract the section, and the section is contracted by default. So basically, when you go through, you'll only see the section title, the summary of receiving total. You won't see the rows below unless you hit that little arrow there. You can see it off to the far right in that same line as the title of summary of receiving total. And then similar in that same area, and don't tell anybody, but I guess I never scrolled down past below the receiving table. I never saw the section below. So this was kind of an aha moment for me when I was going through this. But in addition to the this section, what Coupa's added is basically an additional field, right? So the receipt date in the bulk receiving. And I'm a huge fan of any kind of bulk anything that you can do without having to initiate the bulk loader, right? So any of these apply to multiple rows features, and another very common one is inviting multiple suppliers to the CSP, for example. But this new feature, they've added the receipt date field to the apply to all quick receipts section, which is down underneath that other new section, summary of receiving. So very cool. And that is it for me. I'm going to hand it over to Michael to continue with these very cool features.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. So, and I think there's a lot of clients that are interested in the mobile app, but maybe have not taken that step to deploy that to all of their end users, or maybe just to a couple of their end users. Always been a very useful tool, particularly around expenses, and being able to upload receipts and manage your expense reports for users who are on the go. Coupa has definitely made some enhancements recently, and continuing to take feedback from customers on how they want to be able to utilize the mobile app or other uses, whether that be procurement or inventory. So a couple of items that they're adding for release 40. So the ability to track driving expenses directly in Coupa Mobile. So previously called Smarter Trip. It can utilize the GPS in your phone to capture expenses, so those mileage expenses that otherwise you would have to manually put in, track those, or use the map tool, which is great, but this gives you the ability to do that utilizing the GPS. If you have somebody who is on the road all the time and they are submitting mileage, this is a great way to do that. And I believe that it was only available maybe through iOS previously, now available in Android as well. So happy to see that they've expanded that capability. And then also the ability to request PO back virtual cards in Coupa Mobile. So one of those features that they're adding on the procurement side. So if you have Coupa Pay, you can now request virtual cards directly from the mobile app. So previously you could only view the existing cards detail on your mobile device, and you had to go on into the web UI in order to be able to request a card. They've expanded or made an enhancement to allow you to now request cards directly on the mobile app. So I think another great step there in expanding the use on the mobile app. All right, and on the expense side, not tied to the mobile app, but we're hitting one of Harrison's favorites here. So while this seems like a very simple one, very straightforward, high level, there's been an enhancement to allow you to calculate per diem exclusions in percentage. We know that there are different rules in different countries, and some of them it makes sense to do that configuration or require a configuration to do that per diem exclusion trigger by percentage. So happy that Coupa has made that available now. I'll let Harrison speak to maybe some real world experiences he's had where this has been a need.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I think you said it perfectly. And this one, it's a small update, but one that is much needed, especially for Coupa users that have expenses over in Europe. One of the more common per diem expense policies that our European customers have and clients have is related to percentage-based per diems instead of amounts. And I was recently on an implementation where they had percentage per diems in their policy. Coupa could only accommodate the amount, so we had to do some head math and put in the amounts that would apply to this client. And this client actually, we put a Coupa community post out there, kind of described, hey, this would be great functionality to have. We see this with a lot of our European clients. And we asked, and Coupa listened, and now on release 40, you can now have percentage based per diems. So a small update, but one that I'm definitely excited for, and that I think our friends over in Europe and other countries that use per diems will be excited for as well. I'm also going to say real quick, outside of per diems, I think we have just about 12 minutes left, and we've seen a few questions in the chat. I just want to once again highlight that the Q&A box at the bottom right-hand corner of your Zoom screen. You can ask any questions. We want to make sure, I'm sure folks have questions. We want to be able to answer them. So please put your questions there. And we actually have a team in the background that is answering questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Great. And back over to either Michael or Steve.
It'll be Michael. So yeah, I want to talk about a couple of items around Coupa Pay that are nice enhancements. So you see this one here with the new batching experience rollout. There were actually, the rework of the batching experience, what that page looked like, came back in R36, and some improvements were also introduced in the previous major release, release 39. To make that view much more consistent with what the table views look like for the rest of Coupa. It used to look very different, but they reworked that to make it look more consistent with the pages you're used to dealing with in the Coupa environment. They added some table layouts for an alerts column and also a floating footer. So again, sounds like something simple, but it's nice to have those controls that would be at the bottom of a page as you're scrolling through if you have a lot of rows of data within a table page. The improvements that they've made here, so not just in that layout, but also in interim statuses and how the batching process works. So if your batch has 20 or less payables, everything continues to work the same when you submit that for the batching process. It will process right there on the UI. If there are more than 20, starting back in R39, this was the case. It moved a lot of those processes to the background, so you weren't having to sit there and necessarily wait and watch the page, particularly if you had a lot of payables in a single payment batch. Now they have also introduced these interim statuses to better define where things are in that payment batch process as those background processes are going through. Included in that is the rejection in progress. So obviously these are not necessarily simple processes that are happening and flip of a switch. If you've got several hundred objects in your payment batch, so even when something's being rejected back and it's going through that approval chain, now that will happen in the background and it will show you rejection in progress until that rejection is complete and it moves into a status of draft. The other really big thing here is that currently there's a limit of 300 payments per batch. Coupa is now expanding that out to be 500 payments per batch. So one thing I'll note, a little bit of detail here. So we have this marked as on by default. The new experience is on by default, but if you are interested in having that expansion out to 500 payments per batch, that is something that you do have to request with Coupa. The one caveat that I'll make in there is that if you are doing payments abroad as well as domestically, that you will be required to turn on Smart Split. So in those cases where you have those large batches and you may have a mixture of domestic and cross-border payments, Smart Split, excuse me, will split those actually into two different transactions, with separate funding sources and funding pools. So just do want to make that distinction, but obviously a great thing to be able to expand that out to be able to include more payables in a single batch. Coupa is also introducing same-day payments. So if you use TransferMate, you can now choose same-day payments to make your payments if you have that specific need. So in the transfer type, you'll have the ability to select that as same day. Today, you're familiar with having the opportunity to select next day payments. This is the next step. So the way that this is functionally processed is through a wire payment, so a reverse wire drawdown against your account. So obviously a little bit of setup. So if you are Coupa Pay customer and you want to enable this, there is a form that you will have to complete for your CFA to enable this functionality for that CFA. And then obviously for the supplier payment accounts, for the ones that you're paying out to, you will need to have wire routing number for those clients to be able to make that same day payment. An enhancement around that Coupa has made is wire numbers were previously only able to be added via Coupa supplier portal by the supplier. You now have the ability to update that for a supplier in the SPA when you're creating a US and US dollar based SPA. So a little bit more flexibility there if you have suppliers that you want to get the ability to pay same day. We'll note that there is a single fee per batch that you process for same day payments, and to check with your bank as well. You're probably familiar with making wire payments, and some banks may have a fee on their side as well for processing those same day fees. So just something to be aware of, but it is a single on the Coupa side. TransferMate side, it's a batch fee, not a fee per pay. So notifications for supplier payment accounts and for deactivations of remit to accounts. So Coupa's made some improvements to try and help you understand the status of remit to accounts tied to supplier payment accounts for your suppliers. They have added a new field and a column that's available in the data table for your supplier payment accounts called Last Update. And that will provide you details and the date of the last update made for that supplier payment account tied to any remit to accounts that were tied to that. So this is important because it's helping to try and cut down on inadvertent deactivations of SPAs. We know the pain that can be to try and turn that back up. And beyond notification and insights for you on what the supplier may be doing on their end, there has also been some improvements for the supplier. So when they deactivate a remit to address tied to an SPA, it does provide them an additional warning message, making sure they understand, what's involved with that, what clients will be impacted by deactivating that remit to address, and gives them, if they go through with that, gives them the immediate opportunity to provide a new remit to address once they've deactivated the previous one. So I think a good step there, hopefully in trying to prevent some rework. AI payment security alerts. So this is a new tool it's going to help you to combat payment fraud. So this is on by default. You can see there, you can get to it through setup payments and payment security and fraud controls. So there are 3 different kinds of alerts that are set up here. First, a first payment made to a supplier if it exceeds a certain threshold. And I'll call this one out because it is customizable. So by default, all of these are going to be on. You do have the ability to turn them off individually. But that first payment exceeding a threshold does have the ability to change the amount for that threshold. So by default, that's going to be $50,000 US. But you can go in and make an edit to that specific rule and move that up or down if you choose to. The second piece is if a supplier payment account has been deactivated and a new one created in less than 24 hours. So of course, this would be a little bit of a red flag. Somebody somehow got their credentials and was able to gain access to a supplier's account. and maybe flip them so that they can have payments going to a new bank account. This gives you a notification that this has happened. And if you want to reach out to your supplier and ensure that they really intentionally change their payment information before issuing that payment to them, and just gives you that extra layer of protection and insight that they've made that change. And then it will also give you an alert if a supplier has previously utilized, you have utilized an SPA to pay a supplier previously, and now you're going to use a new SPA to pay them. So it wants to make sure that you really intend to do that. You understand that you've been making payments to them via a different supplier payment account. This is the first time you're making it through this new one, notifying you so you're aware of that. So all positive things, all things we would recommend leaving on. But you do have the ability to go in and either turn these off or customize the amount on that first one with a threshold.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Michael. I see we are at time. So many features to cover in such little time. We will go for a little while longer, but for those of you that have to drop at the top of the hour and want to get your CPE credit, we do have the last polling question that you have to answer in order to get your CPE credit. So I'm going to skip ahead to that real quick, and then we'll go back and talk through our remaining features. So is your organization ready for release 40? We've got 3 different answers there. Of course, there is no right or wrong answer. Just a polling question to see kind of how you feel and where you are at today. So we'll give it just a moment here for folks to answer. Awesome. Let us see the grand results. Okay, so somewhat in the middle, we've got a few that are not as prepared, a few that are very prepared, and then most are somewhere right in the middle. So thank you for answering, everybody. I see that we're at time. We will go on a little while longer and continue our release impacts. I will mention that this recording, if you do need to jump, will be on YouTube, and we'll send it out to everybody, all of our participants. But let me go back a few slides and we'll keep talking through the wonderful and exciting world of release 40.
Thanks, Harrison. So we're back at Coupa Pay. Just a quick enhancement for managing virtual cards, but an important one. Again, some of the simple things. So a consolidation of data wherever we can see that happen. We appreciate when the Coupa developers can meet those requests. So previously, to view the charges for a virtual card, you would have to go out to your profile, and you could see all the charges associated with a virtual card on the profile page. Now they're making that available within the virtual cards page, so My Payments and Virtual Cards. And you have the 2 tabs there. We're showing the charges tab, but even when you're in the card, you'll see kind of a mini table within that card record that shows you all the information, merchant, if there's receipt, tax information, tax details, and the date of that charge. So great that they're bringing that all into one place, and you're able to quickly see if you're missing that tax detail or missing that receipt information on that charge. Now we're moving over to SIM and risk aware. So the RPM tool, a really small one, but a nice one. So contact reference code for contact records. So that's one type of record that we don't have the ability necessarily to do custom fields in. For those of you that use SIM and you're not just using the SIM sync to sync all of your data from SIM to your supplier records, in most cases our ERP or some separate application is our source of truth for supplier information. We may be collecting it via SIM, but we're sending it to that ERP, and then we're sending that information back that is needed for our Coupa supplier records separately. Obviously, when we have, we're transferring that primary supplier information, and that all stays very succinct with the primary contact. But for additional contacts that may be provided in those SIM forms that are just standard contacts, there's the contact that shows up on the SIM record. It's sent to the ERP. If your ERP is even set up to send those additional contacts back into Coupa, into the supplier record, it then creates kind of a separate contact record for that same person. They've added a reference code field that can be used basically to just kind of tie those records together when you're sending things out of Coupa in an integration and then back into Coupa to the supplier record. So it kind of ties those contacts together essentially. So just a nice little add. Your integrations folks will appreciate that. On the risk aware side, some additional features. So bankruptcy data is now supported and provided as part of the risk aware dashboard. So when you go into supplier information and risk aware, you can see the suppliers that are at risk. You will now be able to add a column to see if there is bankruptcy on file for that supplier. It's a yes, no box in that particular, in the table view. It is going to mark as yes if there has been a bankruptcy filed against that supplier in the last 9 years and 9 months. If you see that, then you can dig in to that supplier and see some additional information, as you're seeing there on the screen, additional detail there. The other thing I'll call out with that is when you're going into your supplier, if you have risk aware and you're going to that supplier health page, within the details on how the risk score is formed, you can click on financial score. And now you can download a credit report for those suppliers. So that's a new feature as well. We don't have spelled out here on the screen, but I think a nice feature add some of the basic information, company summary, company ID, credit score, contact info, payment data, any negative information or other additional information that may be pulled for that client. So better understanding for that supplier on maybe how that risk score is being calculated in risk aware. And then last, we'll talk about supplier preferred payments. So just a bit of a change. If you're using SIM, and this does only apply to SIM, although you will see it, even if you don't have SIM, you may see the payment types show up in the payment section on your Coupa supplier records, just to make clear whatever your selections are for that supplier on the supplier record, that's not necessarily visible in Coupa supplier portal to the supplier. So this really applies to SIM forms and what information you want to collect from the suppliers when you're sending them those SIM forms from a remit to payment information perspective. So what we display on the screen, those all show those check boxes unchecked. I will say by default, those are all check marked, with the rationale being that Coupa did not want to limit, force you to have to go in and say, these are the payment types that we prefer. They left them all check marked. So if you are using SIM and you do not have a virtual card program, you will want to probably proactively go in and decheck virtual card. Doesn't mean that if that's checked that you have to pay a supplier via virtual card, but it would give them the ability to say, we're happy to be paid by a virtual card. If you select bank transfer, that's going to force the supplier to provide their banking information. And then check, they could provide just a remit to address for you to send that check to. And you can, of course, if you use both of those payment methods, you can leave both of those check marked as well. All right, and then last thing I want to mention around impacts for CSP. So some of you may be aware that there's a notification for suppliers to add their tax registration information to their Coupa supplier portal profile. So starting with release 39, that was a requirement for any new profiles that were created. This is obviously a security measure, make sure that companies are who they say they are. So starting with release 40, you'll see they'll see notifications if they don't have a tax registration number on file that they need to add that. So the drop dead for that is November 1st. And their access will be limited at that time, but they will start receiving daily reminders. So anytime they log into the CSP between now and then, if they have not added that information, it will notify them that they need to add that information. They do have the ability to mark, I do not have a tax ID, but they will have to provide a valid reason on why they are not, do not have a tax ID or not providing that to be able to continue using Coupa Supplier Portal after November 1st.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. We've already gone through our third polling question, so we'll go ahead and wrap up. So thank you again, everybody, for your attentiveness today. So many key features, so much Coupa, so little time. So thank you for your patience as we did go a little bit over. But as kind of a key takeaway, hopefully you've learned some of the new impacts to your company and your instance as part of Release 40. And please, of course, don't hesitate to reach out to us at Cross Country for any additional support. So a couple other things of what's next. One, we will, in terms of CPE, we will update your participation status, figure out those that did participate and complete the requirements of answering the 3 polling questions and staying on for a majority of the presentation. And then we'll email a certificate of completion to those of you that have been awarded the CPE. And then, of course, as mentioned, don't hesitate to reach out to us at Cross Country for any additional support. You can reach out to Matt with any questions. I've listed his email here, and we'll, of course, send out this deck as part of our, as kind of a takeaway from today's session. And then if you're an existing post-production support customer, feel free to submit a ticket to the team in order to help you with Release 40. And we did have questions in the chat. I don't know if we have enough time to answer questions Q&A verbally today. I see there's some questions in the chat that have been answered. Of course, don't hesitate to email us with any other questions that you might have. And then one last housekeeping item is if you do have issues with the CPE credit, if there are any issues at all whatsoever, we are certified as Cross Country in order to give out CPE credits. And we have included our colleague, Susan, her contact info here. If you do have any questions, comments, concerns, complaints about your CPE credits. So please feel free to contact her with any of your CPE questions. Once again, thank you all for your time today. Hopefully you learned a little bit of something, and looking forward to seeing you on our next release webinar for Release 41 at some point in the future. So thank you all again, and hope you have a great rest of your day.